So in this video, we're going to look at the two main techniques in the Brackel Shawl. So doing Roosimine inlay, worked flat with a ladderback stitch to help with our floats. So you'll have a ladderback stitch, so a column of extra contrast color stitches that run along the spine. This just helps with kind of pivoting around the spine, kind of the point of the shawl. So you get that nice mitered turn. And it also kind of helps with the tensioning of our floats as we're turning around. So I'm going to show you how on this little kind of mini shawl, how we kind of read our charts. So working flat, kind of working on a right side row, right to left, and then on a wrong side row, left to right. So this is all worked over a small section of stockinette. So knit stitches on the right side rows and purl stitches on the wrong side. So we'll have our Roosimine on either side of our nice knit stitch spine, and how to add in that ladder back stitch in our contrast color, and how to work it together so we can transition from these beautiful pattern stripes back into kind of main color textured stitches. So let's get started. So I'm going to get started working my Roosimine stripe on this very mini version of the shawl. So we're going to be working flat. We're going to read, it's going to start off with a right side row, and then we'll do a wrong side row. So you're going to work reading from right to left, and then on your even number rows, left to right. These charts represent each half of the shawl split by our spine. So I'm just going to work to my stitch marker. So we have our garter stitch edge on the shawl, and then I'm going to start from the chart, so working the right half of my spine. So I first have an increase, so I'm going to make one left, and now I'm going to add in my contrast color for the Roosimine. So if I'm going to do is grab my contrast color, we're going to place the tail to the back of our work between the needles. So I'm just sticking it straight between the needles, tail to the back. The working yarn that's attached to the ball is going to be towards the front, towards me. And we're just going to let that yarn hang there. I'm going to pick up my yarn. So you're only going to be knitting with your main color yarn. And I'm going to knit the number of stitches for my float, so that stripe in contrast color, so it's just one. And what you want to make sure when you're doing inlay is that your main color is crossing over top this contrast color. That's going to lock the contrast color floats in place that we're going to be making. So I'm just going to knit one stitch like so, and then I'm going to take my contrast color yarn that's at the front towards me, and I'm going to take that to the back between the needles and let it hang out in the back. I'm going to pick up our main color yarn. Again, this is where you want to make sure that that main color yarn is crossing over that contrast color, and we're going to knit to the next float. This is very similar currently to how you would do this working in the round. We'll have something a little bit different when we do the wrong side rows or working back flat. So I'm going to work this next float. So what I'm going to do is just grab my contrast color, bring it to the front between the needles, leave it there. I'm going to knit the number of stitches for that float. So 3, and I'm just going to work my way, bringing the yarn forwards and backwards to make all of my floats, making sure my main color yarn is always coming over top my contrast color as I'm pulling it forwards and backwards. So we're gonna do this until we get to the spine of our shawl, so that central line right in the middle. So I just have this 1 stitch float here, like so, and 1 stitch in between. You're going to be working increases on each end of each section, so along the garter stitch side as well as the spine. You'll see them in the chart as well, because you shouldn't have any floats usually crossing over top of those increases. So I'm just going to work my increase here like so. I'm going to slip my marker, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit my spine stitch, so the next stitch on my needle here. I'm going to knit that stitch, and now we're going to make our ladderback jacquard stitch. And to do this, I'm going to take my contrast color here that's been hanging out at the back, and I'm going to cast on a stitch using this yarn, and we're going to do that with the backwards loop cast on. So what I'm going to do is basically make a loop. So take the yarn and kind of twist it to make a loop like so. So it's kind of come around, and I'm going to slip this loop, slip the loop onto the needle, and you're going to pull it to tighten. So I've added a stitch onto my needle. So what you'll have is your spine stitch in the main color yarn, and then our ladderback stitch is going to be in our contrast colors. So right now it's in my orange, so that's using the backwards loop cast on. So I'm just going to undo that so you can see that again. So with your contrast color, you're going to twist to make a loop, so it kind of comes in on itself, and I'm going to place that loop onto my needle and pull to tighten. I'm going to slip my stitch marker, so these markers are marking my spine. So during these stripes, you're going to have your spine stitch in your main color and a ladderback in the contrast colors. Then I'm going to work the left half of my shawl, so the left chart, and you're going to start with an increase, because we're going to increase either side of the spine and either side of our garter stitch edge. Just going to untwist my yarn here. And we're going to work again, pulling our yarn to the front when we get to making a float. So I knit up to the start of the first stripe or float for the left half. So my spine is sitting right in the middle of these two charts. And all I'm going to do is bring my contrast color from the back of my shawl, back of my work, to the front. Take main color, and we're going to knit the number of stitches for that float. Take the yarn to the back between the needles, and then we're going to grab our main color. Again, always make sure when you're moving that yarn forwards and backwards that your main color is coming on top or crossing over that contrast color. So you lock those floats in place. So I'm just going to knit to the next float, bring my yarn to the front, leave it at the front, knit the number of stitches for the float, and it does not matter whether you knit continental or English throwing style. When you're doing this, I take my yarn to the back of my work between the needles, and again, make sure that that main color is on top and it's going to cross over that contrast color. I'm going to knit again to, this will be my last float, so bring it back to the front, knit, take it to the back. And when I get to the other side of my shawl, we're going to be working an increase. So we've got our pairs of make one left and right. So I'm going to work that increase. and finish off the garter stitch edge. So that's working across the first round. So now we're gonna flip our work and we're gonna work from the wrong side, and we're gonna be reading our chart from the left to the right. Now, so it does get easier once you get going. So we're gonna work our garter stitch edge as the pattern tells us. And with the wrong side rows, we don't have any increases to work. So we're just gonna work all the stitches that are on the needle. So we're gonna be reading from left to right, and all of our stitches in the even number rows are gonna be purl stitches, and where our floats are, those are gonna be showing what it is on the right side. So I'm gonna start, so I'm gonna purl my blank squares till I get to the first float, which is here, because I'm reading left to right. And instead of bringing the yarn to the front, my yarn should be contrast color already at the front. I'm gonna take it to the back between my needles, leave it there, and then I'm gonna purl the number of stitches for that float. So 2 stitches, 1, 2, and then I'm going to bring my contrast color that's now at what is currently the back or the right side. I'm going to bring it back towards me between the needles like so. And we're going to purl the number of stitches to the next float. So 2. And then I'm going to take my contrast color that's close to me right now to the back towards the right side of my work between the needles like so. And I'm going to purl the number of stitches for that float. So 1 stitch, and then I'm going to take the contrast color and bring it back to the front. Now this particular pattern does a perfect inverse. So you'll see that in the pattern, and you'll see a pattern forming on both sides. If you're ever in doubt, you can flip your work and check what it looks like. So this chart is showing what the floats will look like from the right side. So you can always do a quick double check that you are on track. So I'm just gonna work along. So I'm gonna purl to the next float. So keeping that contrast color towards me. And then when I get to this point, I'm gonna take that yarn to the back towards the right side, and we're gonna purl the number of stitches for that float, like so. And then bring that yarn back to the front. And so that's all of my floats. I'm right here at this point. So I've got those 2 blank squares, so I'm just gonna purl those. And then I will be at the spine. So now that we've worked up to the spine, so where I've got my stitch marker, I'm going to slip my stitch marker, and what we'll see on our needles is we've got 2 stitches. So we have our ladderback stitch, which is in the contrast color, so my orange here, and my spine stitch, which is in my main color in this natural gray. Now with the shawl, all of your stitches are going to be in your main color apart from the ladderback stitch. The ladderback stitch will always be in the contrast color. So I'm going to slip that stitch marker to mark kind of my spine section. And we're first going to work the ladderback stitch. Now from the wrong side row to work it, what we're going to do is take both of our yarns, so contrast and main color, to the back of our work, the way we're holding it. So it's going to go towards the right side. And what I'm going to do is with just the contrast color, I'm going to knit my ladderback stitch. So I want from the wrong side, the ladderback stitch to be a knit stitch. It's going to be like so. Now what I'm going to do is take the contrast color towards the front, towards me, as if to purl. And I'm also going to move my main color as well to the back. And what you want to see, I'm going to try and come up close, is that that main color is coming across the contrast color. So you'll see that little main color, that light gray coming across the orange. So when I work the spine stitch, which is the next stitch on my left hand needle, I'm creating a bar between those, and that's going to hold that ladderback stitch and the contrast color to the back of my work, so you won't see it from the right side. So I'm now going to purl my spine stitch with the main color, like so. And so that is our ladderback spine section. So I'm going to slip stitch marker, and then I'm going to do similar thing that I did previously on the left half of my little mini shawl here. I'm going to work the right half. Again, we're reading from left to right. So I'm going to be purling all of my stitches. You're going to purl your blank squares with your main color. And when you get to the floats or the stripe sections, I'm just going to purl 2 stitches. We're going to take that contrast color, which we're keeping at the front towards us. We're going to take it now to the back between the needles. And we're going to be purling because we're on the wrong side. We want this to be stockinette. So I'm going to purl the number of stitches that little float spans. So 2 stitches. Purling with the main color, like so. And then I'm going to move my contrast color from that float for this wrong side section from the back to the front between the needles. Main color is going to stay at ready to purl. I'm going to purl the blank stitches, so the ones without a float, with my main color before I move that contrast color again. So this is for the wrong side. So now I'm going to take that contrast color from the wrong side to the right side, purl the stitch for that float, like so, and move it back to the front. And you're just going to carry on moving it forwards and backwards across. And just bear in mind that you are purling these stitches when we're working from the wrong side, so our even number rows, like so. So I'm going to work all the way to my stitch marker, so that's just marking where my garter stitch edge is. That contrast color is going to stay at the front of the wrong side because we want it there. We don't want it coming across our borders. I'm just going to knit those and turn this around like so. So this should look exactly like my chart. So as you're working the wrong side, if you're ever in doubt, you can always flip it around to see that that is matching up. So your charts are showing what the right side is looking like. And when you have finished a color, if you're working with 2 colors, we're just going to cut a tail, so break that color and leave yourself a tail for weaving in. And I'm just going to turn this around, and we're going to do this right side row. So I'm switching colors to match my chart, and I'm going to show you how to do this right side row. So this will be round 3 because we're going to work our ladderback stitch from the right side. So I'm now going to work row 3, which is a right side row, and I'm just going to work the garter stitch edge section of our shawl first, and then we're going to start back in on our chart. So because we're on a right side row, our odd number rows, we're going to be reading right to left across both halves of our shawl charts. So I'm going to, with the inlay, you're always going to work up until the first float before you get into dealing with the contrast colors. So I'm going to work my increase here and then this one plain knit stitch, and then we'll add in our contrast color. So like so, And because I've changed colors, we're going to pop our contrast color in just like we did at the start. So I'm going to grab my new contrast color, and all I'm going to do is literally pop it between the needles. So tail going to the back of my work, and the working yarn is towards me at the front. We're going to just let that hang out there. We're going to grab our main color. I want to make sure our main color is going to be crossing over our contrast, and we're going to knit the number of stitches for that first float in our new contrast color, like so. And because we're on a right side row, all of our stitches are going to be knit stitches. So our inlay is worked over stockinette. So on the right side, it's knit stitches, and on wrong side rows, they will be purl stitches. So now I'm going to take my contrast color to the back of my work between the needles. It's going to hang out there. I'm going to grab my main color. You want to make sure your main color is on top. Contrast color is below so that it's going to cross over. And I'm going to work across to my next float, and reading this row right to left. Grab my contrast color, bringing it to the front of my work between the needles. Let that hang. Knit the number of stitches for this next float. 2, 3, always knitting with our main color. Take my yarn to the back and work to the next float, and then bring it back to the front. So on. So I'm at the end, did the last float. I'm gonna do my increase because I'm right by the spine of my shawl. So we're gonna do that increase, and then I'm going to slip my stitch marker, and we are back at that spine section. So on the right side row, we have first the spine stitch, which is in our main color, followed by the ladderback stitch in our contrast color. So I'm going to work, my spine stitch is always a knit stitch on the right side and a purl stitch on the wrong side. So I'm going to just knit that with my main color. Now we're going to work our ladderback stitch, and you'll see that the ladderback stitch is presenting as a purl stitch. So it's a purl bump, and from the wrong side, it is a knit, and that's how we want to keep it. So to do that, what I'm going to do is bring my main color to the front, kind of as if I was going to purl, and I'm going to do the same with my contrast color. So both main color and contrast color are at the front. We're just going to work with the contrast color for our ladderback stitch, so it's always going to stay in the contrast color. And I'm going to go into this stitch as if to purl, and we're going to purl that stitch. And then I want to leave both yarns at the front like so. Now I'm going to start moving them to the back. I'm going to first move my contrast color to the back, and then I'm going to move the main color to the back. And what you want to see, like I pointed out when we're doing the other side, is that you're going to get a bar in the main color, and I want that coming across all of that contrast color of our ladderback stitch, because that's what's going to pull it together like so. So you're not going to see the ladderback, it will only show up from the wrong side. So now I'm going to slip that marker, and we're going to start in on the other half of our shawl, so the left side chart, and you're starting off with an increase like so, and then we are going to be working round 3, so we're reading right to left and pulling our contrast color to the front when we are at the start of a float between the needles. Knit the number of stitches for that float, take the yarn to the back, knit the stitches in between with our main color, and then bringing it forwards and backwards, always making sure your main color is going to cross over that contrast color. It's mostly important when you are pulling the contrast color to the back again. So like so. You want to make sure that that main color is going to come across it. So I'm just going to work across this row, like so. And I'm just pulling the yarn forwards and backwards as I need it until you get to the other side, and you will then have your other increase stitch right at the other end, so like so, and then our garter stitch edge. So then I'm going to turn this around so we can see from both the wrong side and the right side. So from the right side it looks like this. You should be able to see that it matches the chart. And on the wrong side it's going to look like this. So you are going to get a column of stitches from the ladderback in the contrast color that will be knit stitches, and from the front you won't see it, but we're going to just have our spine knit stitches. So that is how we're going to work every subsequent row with the ladderback stitch from the right side. The next one, which will be round 4, we're going to be reading from left to right, and those stitches are going to be purl stitches, and we'll work just as we did for round 2, be the same as well for round 6. All right, so I have knit all 7 rows of the chart, so it looks something like so. So you can check that your floats look exactly like the chart, should look matching. So from the right side, you'll see you have a nice knit stitch spine. You should not be able to see that ladderback stitch. The only place you'll see it from the right side is, let me just get this to focus, is on just where your cable is or your needle is, those live stitches. So you'll see the contrast color stitch and it's a little purl bump from the right side. And if I flip this over, what you'll see is here is our lovely ladderback, and it is a nice column of knit stitches. Now I have finished the chart and I'm going to segue into just working with my main color yarn. What I'm going to do is work along to where this ladderback is, and I am going to decrease, because essentially in this spine section I technically have 2 stitches and I'm going to go back to 1 stitch. So I'm going to show you how to do that. This is going to be worked from the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to slide this off and work our garter stitch border. So with the Brackel Shawl, you are working in seed stitch. So I'm going to start following my seed stitch pattern. It will tell you. So I'm just alternating my knits and purls. So I'm going to work all the way up to my spine, and then we're going to combine those together. Right, so now I'm at the spine. I'll just move our chair out of the way. And so what I want to do is combine these 2 stitches together. So my ladderback in the contrast color and my main color spine stitch. And I want to do this so that from the right side, I'm not going to see the ladderback. Now, because we're doing this on the wrong side, what we're first going to do is swap the position of the stitches. So I want my ladderback stitch to actually be stitch number 2 on my left hand needle, and this spine stitch to be the first one. So what I like to do is, a couple of different ways. You can use a cable needle as well. I sometimes will stick in this stitch, stick my needle, my right hand needle, in to the second stitch, so the main color stitch, as if to purl, slide those 2 stitches off so the ladder back's floating, pick it up that, and swap them like so. So this is what I want to have. So main color spine stitch first and ladder back stitch second. And then what I'm going to do, we're going to keep the yarn in front. So our main color yarn is the only one that's working. And I'm going to purl those 2 together. So I'm just going to insert as if to purl through both the spine and the ladder back and purl 2 together and slide off. Now what you should see, if you're ever in doubt, I'm just going to move my yarn out of the way, is I should not see that ladder back. It's going to kind of halo behind, but it shouldn't be prominent. And from this wrong side, we're going to have a purl bump kind of at the top of this column of contrast color knit stitches from our ladder back, and that's going to finish off. And then I'm going to slide, and I'm going to carry on with my seed stitch pattern to the other side. So that just kind of caps off our ladder back. And then you would repeat this whole process again when you are doing the next Roosimine straight.